member of Israel's Knesset, Yehuda Glick. He's the chairman of the Temple Mount Heritage Foundation, the leader of Haliba, a coalition dedicated to the freedom of rights for Jews on the Temple Mount. Sadly, he came only too close to our remembering him. In 2014, he survived an assassination attempt by a member of the Islamic Jihad who shot him point blank, and miraculously we join him and his family in expressing our gratitude to the Ribbon Shalom, the Almighty, that he is with us and still in a position of leadership today. Thank you for your leadership in Israel and for our people. Thank you for fighting for our values. Thank you for fighting for our rights on our holiest place, on Har HaBayit, the Temple Mount. And we only pray that your efforts are realized as all of us are able to ascend that mount and to pray with the rebuilding of the Beis HaMikdash. Please rise and join me in welcoming member of Knesset, Yehuda Glick.
Shalom. Memorial Day, Yom Hazikaron, is an extremely difficult day for those who live and experience the price we are paying for living in the state of Israel. One of the most difficult things I recall for myself every year on Yom Hazikaron is to go over all of those pictures in my mind of people who I know personally and to decide who should I concentrate on, what should I remember. It's a difficult decision. I've been living for the last 24 years in a settlement which has paid an extremely heavy price. 12 citizens of our yeshuv, including 4 talmidim of the yeshiva, including the rabbi of the yeshuv, Rav Ami Ulami, who was murdered on the road 20 years ago, a very modest, dignified Talmid Chacham. Whether it's Eliyahu ben Ami, who was also murdered on the road 18 years ago. His daughter married 8 years later. Just a little more than a year ago, her husband's father, Mickey Mark, was also shot and killed on the same road. So I can concentrate on so many of these names and look at these people whom I've known personally. And that dilemma of who you concentrate on. I will try, in the few minutes that I will be speaking, to concentrate on the concept. I will also speak personally about my loss. But I want to tell you about my visit this week on Friday to Poway. We visited the community. We paid a Shiva condolence visit call to Howard, husband of Lori Gilbert Kay, house which is full of love. The garden is organized with hearts all over. In the garden there's a pole which has 4 sides of it, which says play a prayer for shalom in 4 languages. Hebrew, English, Spanish, and Yiddish. In the center of the living room, there's 12 paintings of the Chagall windows, and in the center, the blessings for Shalom. And to remind ourselves that though last week we marked the Kedoshim that were killed in the Holocaust, and today when we are remembering the Kedoshim that were killed in the wars and the terror on the battle for the state of Israel. And to remind ourselves that though we call them Kedoshim, there are two interesting points that I wanted to point out. First of all, in the Torah, we don't find, but when the Torah talks about Kedusha, as the rabbi mentioned before, Kedoshim to you, first of all, he talks about the people in general, and secondly, it talks about living a life of Kedusha. And the mitzvah the Torah teaches us of memory, v'zacharta, zikaron, also the mitzvah of zikaron, even of Yetziat Mitzrayim. When the Torah teaches us in this week's parsha, the idea of remembering Yetziat Mitzrayim is to remind ourselves how to be better people. Tem yida'atem et nefesh hager. You know what it means to suffer as a stranger in a different land. So yes, the remembering. I want to speak about a very beloved person who I will be remembering today and was recognized, maybe surprisingly, as a terror victim. As the rabbi mentioned, the past 2 decades I devoted my life to teaching the world the concept of Yerushalayim, city of shalom, city of harmony, city of diversity, city of inclusiveness. And unfortunately, 4.5 years ago, I was approached by a person who came over to me at the end of an evening. I spoke about the concept and the central role Yerushalayim plays in our life. And he approached me. I was walking out of the Begin Center after we had such a beautiful evening with so many people speaking about Yerushalayim. We had there religious, non-religious, left and right, Jews and non-Jews. And I was so happy. And my wife went to get the car to pick me up. And as I was walking out, carrying some material, paper give-outs that I had in the evening, and everybody had gone home already. There were two of my friends of mine, Maria and Shai, and I was walking towards the car. My wife was on the phone talking to a friend of hers who her son went through a surgery that day, and she signaled to me to put the stuff in the back of the car. I put the stuff in the back of the car, and I go back to get another hand load, and as I turn around, a motorcycle stops in front of me. A guy all dressed up in black and white helmet. And he comes over to me and he says to me, "I'm sorry, you are an enemy of Al-Aqsa." Pulls out a pistol, point blank, 1 foot away, shoots 4 bullets to the center of my body. I was critically injured. Shai and Maria ran to Amic Rafael Street and yelled, "Pigua." I managed to stutter. My wife hit under the steering wheel. She was going to shoot her. And she yelled at the phone, "Hadassah, call an ambulance, please." And her girlfriend, Hadassah, was the one to order the first one to call Magen David Adom for an ambulance. I managed to walk like 20 yards until I collapsed. And I was bleeding. My hand was crushed. My stomach, my chest was bleeding. And he drove away. Maria and Shai ran back. Shai says to Maria, "We just witnessed murder. You go take care of Yafi." with my wife, and Shai comes over to me. He calls on the phone a friend of his, a paramedic, and he starts ripping off my shirt and talking to me, and then he says to me, Rabbi Yehuda, don't go, we need you. And that was the last words I remembered until I lost my conscience. I was taken to the hospital. My family were told to come, say goodbye. My sister describes me how she's going through her closet to decide which shirt she could take to tear. And the chances for me to survive in those moments were very, very, very minor. Baruch Hashem, I survived. Baruch Hashem, the miracles of the Nisim of the Israeli medical system, one of the great Nisim of the state of Israel. Doctors managed to save my life. I would say that the Arab Muslim who shot me in the name of Islam and was killed that night after the Israeli security forces knocked on his door and he went up to the roof to shoot it at them. He didn't know there were 4 guys, Secret Service, waiting on his roof. And he was killed. He shot me in the name of Islam. I don't know how much he did for Islam. But the surgeon who operated me, one of the surgeons who operated on my chest, who was a Muslim, and the Muslim nurse who took care of me in the intensive care unit, did a lot more for Islam. But I wanted to continue, because after 10 days of being connected to respiratory machinery, being out of conscious, and a month in the hospital, I was sent home, and my wife, my beloved wife, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, was taking care of me and taking care of my rehabilitation for 3 months, until I was able to, once again, stand on my feet and walk around. But then, unfortunately, she sunk into post-trauma. She was very aware of it. She was taking care of it. She saw psychiatric professionals. She did everything that said in the book. She wrote poetry. She went to photography. She did yoga, Pilates, anything possible to overcome the deep depression she fell into. But unfortunately, she didn't survive. And a year and a half later, traumatically, she lost consciousness. She was for 6 months out of consciousness until she died a little more than a year and a half ago. She was recognized also as a terror victim, because until the day I was shot, she was running the office of the social workers in the welfare department in the municipality where we live in Hazikaron, and she was running around the clock, full-time job. But witnessing what happened to me, and also losing our next-door neighbor, close friend, Daphne Meir, who was shot in her house, and the other next-door neighbor, Riti Mark, on the right side of my house, the Mark family, and the left side of the house, the Meir family. And with such a short time, losing these friends, and every single time, she sunk back into this post-trauma. I was a widower for a little over a year. Baruch Hashem, I remarried 3 months ago to a wonderful wife, Hadass, who was also a widow for 17 years. She raised 4 of her children alone. She became a widow from her husband who passed away suddenly while baking matzot 18 years ago. She raised her 4 children alone. And 2 years ago, she established an organization dealing with orphans and widows. What I wanted to speak about most, and here as I get back to the main concept. Yes, today we are marking the more than 23,500 soldiers and terror victims who have paid their lives for the establishment of the State of Israel. And every one of them, every one of the faces of those I know and others are in front of my eyes on a daily basis. But I also remind myself that 23,000 is less than a half of a day in the gas chambers of Auschwitz. So 70 years we have been sweating, struggling, but those soldiers and those terror victims have paid a price when we can see with our own eyes how the state of Israel is flourishing in every single level possible, way beyond the proportions of our size. In any way you can look at it, Israel, of the 4 countries that sent the spaceship to the moon, tiny little United States, tiny little Russia, and tiny little China, and great Israel. And Israel is turning ocean water into drinking water. And Israel, who just last year sent a team to help in California to put out a fire because they knew they have a system of taking air and turning it into water. And teams from Israel helping it here in Florida after a hurricane. And Israel, when I just read lately an article written by Rav Herzog. In 1949, he was the chief rabbi of Israel, and he said we have to say Hallel and Yom HaAtzmaut. And he explains, because now, if there's any anti-Semitism in the world, we'll have a shelter to run away from. He couldn't dream that 70 years later, Israel will be a nation teaching the world, giving the world ways, saving Africa, their agriculture, saving Latin America, and growing and growing. And this Israel has a message to the world because we're not only a state that succeeded in 70 years, we're a nation that has a mission and was chosen by HaKadosh Baruch Hu to be a light to the nations. And the establishment of the state of Israel, which is described in the book 4,000 years ago, when Hashem says, I'm going to scatter you all over the world, and eventually I'll bring you back home to your homeland. And we have an obligation to take this state of Israel and to turn it into a light to the nation. And therefore, when I went to Poway on Friday, not only did I pay a Shiva visit to Howard K., not only did I visit the Chabad Center, not only did I dance and hug Rabbi Goldstein, I found it an obligation to make another visit. I visited, I don't know if you followed the news, but the terrorist who shot at the Chabad Center a month earlier made an attempt to burn down a mosque a few miles away from it. I found it an obligation, though I'm not a representative of the state of Israel anymore. Tuesday, 1 week ago, I gained finally a title which is permanent, former member of Knesset. But I went there to attempt to the mosque, and I said to the people there, and I was met with one of the people who was there that night when the guy tried to burn down the mosque, and I said, we who believe in the one and only HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in the one and only God, we have an obligation to come and unite and fight this wave which is hitting the world, whether it's in Sri Lanka, or in New Zealand, or in Paris, or in Pittsburgh, or in Poway. We have to speak up and say what the Torah teaches us, that God is an El Chai. And this week the Torah puts a specific portion devoted to the Aveira of Molech, killing in the name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the name of God. There is no bigger Chilul Hashem than that. If there's anything that's opposite than God's name, is hate and murder. The only mitzvah that appears in every one of the Chamisha Chumshei Torah is the mitzvah of the Isser to kill. Shofech dam ha'adam ba'adam damo yishafech. Ki b'tzelem Elohim asai et ha'adam. And this is something we have to teach, and we have an obligation to be superior in agriculture, to be superior in medicine and in high tech, but also to be superior in our moral behaviors. Show an example that this Kedusha, that these Kedoshim who have fallen, have left us a mission to continue and to continue sanctifying God's name in the world, because that is what God chose Am Yisrael for. And this is what we are here for in this world, to bring about this message that we, Am Yisrael, all these benefits, all these achievements that we have achieved in the state of Israel are not just for our sake. They're for the sake of the world. They're for the sake that we are a light to the nations, that we are here to bring this light to the world. And not by coincidence do we mark these days in Sfirat HaOmer. Though in the tradition, Sfirat HaOmer is also part of marking days of mourning in remembering of Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva. And there we learn to respect one another. But the original Sfirat HaOmer, which we will be reading in not this coming parsha, or actually in Israel this coming parsha, here in Chutzot next week's parsha, is an unbelievable issue. Counting 50 days from the day you have the barley, from the day you bring your crop to the Beit HaMikdash, until the 50th day where you bring bread to Beit HaMikdash. The concept of Sfirat HaOmer is the idea. Sfirat HaOmer, we begin on Tetzayin B'Nisan, the day that the man stops falling down from heaven. In the desert, we have the miracles of man falling down from heaven. In the past century, we've seen miracles that are even greater than those described in the Torah. Yetziat Mitzrayim, we were in Egypt for maybe 400 years. In one country, in the exile, we were for 2,000 years, in 100 to 200 countries. So the miracles we see today are greater than those that we saw in Yetziat Mitzrayim. 600 wagons chasing us. In the 6-day war, we had 200 million chasing 2 million Jews. We managed to overcome our enemies on each one of our borders, because we know that if our enemies put down their ammunition, there will be peace in the world. If we put down our ammunition, there won't be in Israel. So we see greater miracles than those in the time of Mitzrayim. But the difference between the miracles that we see today and those is that in our generation, the miracles are implemented by human beings. And this is the idea of Sfirat HaOmer. When God sent Adam Harishon from heaven, from Gan Eden, He sent him, He said, from now on, you're going to have to work hard to get your bread. You're going to have to sweat to get your bread. The miracles that you're going to see are not obvious, like picking a loaf of bread from the tree. You're going to have to work hard to get it. But eventually, if you do it, and you remember that the bracha you made on manna in the desert was Hamoti Lechem in Hashamayim, and the bracha we make in Israel is Hamoti Lechem in Haaretz, but it's the same God who's bringing this and bringing that. But we remind ourselves, from bringing the first crop to bringing the bread, that we're working hard and we're sweating. But we're sweating because we have a goal. And these days, which we mark as the days of Sfirat HaOmer, we know that eventually we will bring the bread to Beit HaMikdash. But the fighting on a daily basis, to turn and remember that this sweat, that this price that we're paying has a hope, the state of Israel. And yes, I want to conclude with the issue which I'm very much identified as, the Temple Mount. The Temple Mount, which is supposed to be Beiti Beit Tfilah Yikareh L'Chol Ha'amim. All the nations are supposed to come there and call in the name of the one and only God. Unfortunately, in the last few years, we saw that the Temple Mount was becoming a house of harassment, incitement, terror, hate. I took upon myself to change that, because though the word Kiddush Hashem and Chilul Hashem are used to an extreme, to once I heard somebody say, a religious woman who's doesn't have good makeup on is a Chilul Hashem. I'm not sure that's the exact concept of a Chilul Hashem, but the Torah tells us what Chilul Hashem is. Chilul Hashem is Chilul Hashem, desecrating God's name. And if God chose a place, Kivachar L'Shaken Shmo Sham, His name is there. And from the place that God's name is there, and God's name is Shalom, we see a message coming out, a message of hate and terror and killing. This is a Chilul Hashem. Understanding this, 2 decades ago I began encouraging Jews to go to Temple Mount. Baruch Hashem, when I began ascending Temple Mount, there were 100 Jews annually. In 2018, we had 35,000 Jews who went up to Kedusha B'Tara annually. We see Goyim going up to Har Bayit who understand this. In 2013, we had 180,000 non-Muslims, non-Jews who ascended as tourists to Har Bayit. In 2018, we had 670,000. In the past few years, as I was a member of Knesset, we outlawed the Islamic Northern organization, which was encouraging hate. The Morabitan have been outlawed. And today Har Bayit is gradually, slowly, step by step, just like Sfirat HaOmer. No shortcuts. Step by step. It's becoming back to what it should be. And this is our main goal. When I planned to come to America months ago, I didn't know that I'd be newlywed. I didn't know I wouldn't be a Chaver Knesset anymore. So right after I left the Knesset, I told my wife maybe I should cancel this trip. And my wife, Hadas, with her great neshama, told me, you're going for Am Yisrael, you go. And the day after I left the Knesset, my team all were going out on their business, and I told Uri Bank, my CEO, devoted CEO, that no, we're not stopping, we're beginning. The next day we went in to the Misrad HaMishpatim, the Office of Justice, and we signed up a new organization called Shalom Yerushalayim. And here, the idea of bringing shalom between Am Yisrael, inside of Am Yisrael, religious and non-religious. The mitzvah of bringing shalom between Am Yisrael in Eretz Yisrael and the Jewish diaspora. We're all one. The concept of teaching the world what one God means, fighting anti-Semitism, fighting any kind of hate, being better people, being a light to the nation. All of those things I will take upon myself with this foundation that established the movement of Shalom Yerushalayim. I don't know exactly how everything's going to be done, but I knew that today, as I celebrate my personal holiday of Chirut from being a Chaver Knesset, I will devote my life to bringing shalom in the world, to bringing the concept of light in the nation, so that every one of these soldiers and every one of these terror victims should not be in vain. Thank you.
Please remain standing, give your attention to Rabbi Blumenthal and Shlomi Lagasse, who will lead us in the singing of Hatikva. I want to once again thank the Galish family, thank Shoshana, Glenn,